Nearly 10 years ago in October 2014, Ezra Miller was cast as the Flash, and finally, 9 years later, we have only just now got to see the first live-action Flash movie, and I've got a lot of thoughts on this film. This is the first time I think I've ever left a movie feeling like this, and I have been really trying to figure out what I'm going to say for the past week or so before writing this, and I still don't quite know. I've already tried to film this once already, and it just kind of turned into a big rambling mess, so let's hope this one's a bit better. First off, let's start with Ezra Miller. Now, I am by no means going to use the controversy surrounding this actor as a way to influence any thoughts I have about this film, but I will say that Ezra's performance in this film is by far the absolute highlight for me. They played it absolutely amazing. This is not the Barry Allen that we are used to seeing, especially if you are familiar with the comics. Now, it was hinted at in both the theatrical version and Zack Snyders' Justice League, but this Barry Allen is very clearly neurodivergent, and I have to say that I really didn't expect them to lean into this as much as they did, but again, this was absolutely one of the highlights for me. As someone who is around neurodivergent people on a regular basis, I have to say that the way they played this part was truly spot on and is one of the most accurate portrayals I've seen of someone who is very clearly autistic in a film. Not only that, but the arc that Barry goes on in this film, while nothing new for the Flash as a character, was handled with the utmost care and respect, which I am absolutely thankful to the creators for. We all know from the trailers that there are two versions of Barry in this film, and watching our Barry get to interact with himself and see himself from a different perspective and how that influences where he ends up at the end of the movie was really a nice touch and something that really works for the character. Speaking of Barry too, I feel the creators really were using him as a way to show a version of the Flash's origin without actually showing us our Barry's origin, which honestly I liked, but there were parts in this movie that, if they were delved into more, is something I would have much rather preferred over what we got. Now, obviously this film is adapting the Flashpoint story from the comics, and while that is the case, this is still very much its own film and is in no way a carbon copy of the story we've seen before, which is something I absolutely respect. I see a lot of people talking about comic accuracy and what we should have gotten, but that never really bothers me, as to me there is no point in just creating a carbon copy of an already existing story, because if that was the case, then just go read the original story, because that will be superior almost every single time. A film has to have something unique and important to say, and I truly believe The Flash absolutely did just that. Now, if you like the way the creative team changed the story to fit Barry's arc or not is entirely up to you, but saying that something is bad because it isn't the exact same story as the comics is a criticism that entirely lacks any kind of nuance, which unfortunately is a lot of criticism nowadays, especially from comic book fans when films happen to be adapting big stories from the comics. Now, speaking of Flashpoint, there are two big characters in here that fans have been waiting to see, and that is of course Michael Keaton's Batman and Sasha Calle's Supergirl. And one of my fears going in was that they would be such a big role in the film that they would overshadow Barry and his arc throughout the movie. Fortunately, this is absolutely not the case. Even though Keaton specifically was in the film for a good chunk, it never felt like he was too big of a presence for the main story of the film. I think his character was used just the right amount and is another one of the highlights of the movie for me. As for Supergirl, the same very much applies, although this is very much an alternate timeline Supergirl and is not the Supergirl you would be used to if you've read her comics. I really hope Sasha Calle can play Supergirl in the new DCU going forward, because she has so much potential and absolutely killed it in this role. Now moving on to the big one, visuals. I'm sure that by now you've all heard about the visuals in this movie, but before I talk about the visuals that weren't so great, I want to talk about some of the visuals that I really liked. The opening sequence of this movie, I think the visuals are top notch for the most part. Andy Muschietti came out the other day and did mention that some of the visuals in this movie are supposed to look a bit off because we are seeing things from the Flash's perspective, while he is moving at super speed, which I absolutely appreciate, and that is certainly present in the opening scene. Another great use of the visuals in this movie is when Barry is entering the Speed Force. I truly believe that that was some of the most visually satisfying stuff to come out of any live action Flash media. Also, while Barry is using specific abilities, they do something really unique with one of Barry's abilities, which I was definitely hoping they would do. Now, to get onto the not so good visuals, which there is unfortunately a lot of, especially running towards the third act. I almost feel like the VFX was intentional in a way, as it feels very vibrant and saturated and feels very stylistic in its approach, almost like the director tried to make it feel like the Mark Waid comics run, where everything is much more bright and vibrant on the page than subsequent runs. And something else I think is a big problem for the most part is the battle with Zod, which we see in the trailer just kind of takes place on this flat plane with no kind of dynamic terrain to grab you and pull you into what's going on in the fight. This also makes the CGI work particularly noticeable because there is nothing nothing in the terrain to cast any kind of shadows or changing in lighting, so it just kind of makes everything look uniform and lack lighting texture, which makes the VFX work super noticeable. There is also a sequence as well towards the end of the movie, which I'm not going to go into as it pertains to heavy spoilers, although if you've been on the internet for the past week or so, you know exactly what I'm talking about, as it has been everywhere, especially all over Twitter, which is my absolute least favorite part of the movie. That all being said, there is definitely more positives than negatives in my mind throughout the movie. It just so happens that the negatives are super noticeable and is really something you have to really try and look past to get to the meat of the film. So, do I recommend to go see The Flash? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fun movie. Is it the greatest comic book film ever made? Absolutely not. It kind of reminds me of those early 2000 comic book movies, you know, the Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four. It feels like it would fit nicely into that era. But there is a good movie in here, and I think when it works, it really works super well. We have an extremely heartfelt story about Barry Allen and his battle with a tragedy that defines his life up to this point. There's a quote by Batman in this, which we get part of in the trailer, that is my absolute favourite Bruce Wayne Batman moment I've ever seen in the DCEU.
These scars we have make us who we are. We're not meant to go back and fix them. Don't let your tragedy define you.
And I think that's the big takeaway from this movie. I give The Flash a 7 out of 10. So now, hopefully, we as a society are done with the Flashpoint story and can move on to other, and in my opinion, better Flash stories. That being said, what are your guys' thoughts on the Flash movie? Feel free to comment and let me know. Also, one last thing before I go, we have hit 10,000 subscribers, which is absolutely nutty. I cannot believe it. So I'm going to link my Patreon down in the description. As I said in my last video, I would make a Patreon at 10k. So if you would like to support my channel, please feel free to pledge $1, £1, whatever to that. That would be absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much, guys. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. Go and enjoy The Flash.